My palms were sweating so much that the plastic folder almost slipped out of my hands as I took out my keys. The hallway of our house, as always, greeted me with the smell of lemon air freshener and the exquisite silence that Wayne so carefully observed. Today, this perfection seemed particularly unbearable to me. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air got stuck somewhere between my throat and lungs. I had to gather myself. The dismissal papers, neatly folded in a sea wave colored folder, seemed overwhelmingly heavy. The clock in the living room read 6 in the evening. Wayne should have been home from work by now. He always arrived at exactly 6:30, even if he had to close a deal worth millions. Punctuality is respect, he was fond of saying. I wonder what he would have called my delay today. Disrespect? Irresponsibility? Typical Libby? Wayne? My voice sounded too quiet, almost guilty. I hated that tone of voice, but years of habit had made it second nature. In the kitchen, he replied shortly. I saw his broad back as I walked over to the kitchen island. Wayne Prescott, 37 years old, with a profile that could have been minted on a coin, was pouring himself a whiskey. He had that subtle, smug smile on his face that I had learned over 8 years of marriage. He smiled like that when he was particularly pleased with himself after a successful deal, after putting someone in their place, after every time he proved his superiority. You're early, he said, raising the glass to his lips. Did something happen in that lab of yours? Did you mishandle the chemicals again? He called my workplace that lab of yours, with a tone of voice that sounded like a child's game, not serious research. I swallowed my resentment, not for the first time. I got fired, I said simply, without preamble. Wayne froze with his glass to his lips. For a second, his eyes widened in surprise, and then I saw it, the same smile that appeared on his face every time he felt superior. It was subtle, a slight lift of the corners of his lips, a faint wrinkle near his right eye, but I knew that expression all too well. Fired? He put down his glass and turned his whole body to me. God, Libby, what did you do this time? I didn't do anything. My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be. They disbanded the whole department. Downsizing, he said, taking another drink of whiskey. And of course they decided to fire you. Not Jeremy, not Patricia, not anyone else. You. The whole department's been disbanded, Wayne. They fired everyone. Really? He walked around the kitchen island and stopped right in front of me. 6 feet 2 inches of pure superiority. Wayne always had a way of looking at me that made me feel small, insignificant. So, what now? He asked, putting his hands in his pants pockets. You gonna look for a job again? Are you gonna ask for references again? Are you gonna try to prove yourself again? I felt anger flare up in my chest, but, as always, I suppressed it. Not now, not here. Yes, I said calmly, I'm gonna look for a job. Libby, he shook his head as if he were talking to an unreasonable child. We both know it's only a matter of time. You were fired for a reason. You've always been. He seemed to be searching for the right word, mediocre. The phone in my pocket vibrated, but I ignored it. Keeping my eyes on Wayne, I very slowly put the folder on the table. I was one of the top researchers in the company, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course, he laughed, and it was a razor-sharp laugh. That's why you were the first to be fired. That's why you were the lowest paid employee in your department. That's why the management didn't even remember your name at last year's corporate party. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a longer message, not a call. I involuntarily pulled it out of my pocket. Oh, are they calling you for an interview yet? Wayne asked sarcastically. Don't get your hopes up. No one will hire you for a serious position. I always knew you'd fail, Libby. Always have. It was only a matter of time. I unlocked my phone and saw a message from Mercy. Call me back urgently. And underneath it was a letter from the Friedman and Partners law firm. I opened it while Wayne continued his tirade about my worthlessness. The text of the letter made me freeze. Dear Ms. Harlow, we are pleased to inform you that the sale of patent number USX 10,854,322A has been successfully completed. The full amount of 10 million US dollars will be transferred to the account you have provided within 3 business days. Congratulations on a successful transaction. Sincerely, Samantha Friedman. $10 million. $10 million for my catalyst, which I have been working on in secret for almost 3 years, for a formula that no one knew about, not my lab colleagues, not my bosses, and certainly not Wayne. $10 million for what my husband called stupid chemical experiments and a waste of time. Are you listening to me? Wayne's sharp voice brought me back to reality. You're too. He paused, choosing a word. Worthless for it. Worthless. He had been using this word especially often lately. Before, there were incompetent, impractical, and naive, but worthless has become his favorite over the past year. I looked up from my phone and looked at him. For the first time in months, I was actually looking at my husband, at his perfectly trimmed hair with gray at the temples, which, he said, gave him solidity, at the impeccable suit that cost more than I earned in a month, the gold watch, a gift from me on our 5th anniversary. I took out a loan to make him feel good, and the contemptuous smile that always appeared when it came to my abilities. Should I tell him? Tell him that I had just received more money than he would earn in 10 years? Show him that his worthless wife created something that was valued at $10 million? The phone in my hand vibrated again. This time, it was a call from Mercy. I dismissed it without taking my eyes off Wayne. You know, he sighed with theatrical disappointment. I've been wanting to say this for a long time, but now is the time. We have to break up, Libby. His words should have shocked me, but somehow I felt only a slight shiver of relief, as if someone had finally opened a window in a stuffy room. Separate? I repeated to buy myself time to think. Yes, he nodded, and his eyes got an expression I knew all too well. Wayne was enjoying his moment of power. We both know this isn't working. You're not the woman I need. I need someone more, more worthwhile. The word echoed in my head as I looked at my phone screen again. $10 million. Which one of us is worth more right now, Wayne? I'll find someone better, he continued, not noticing my silent reaction. Someone who is worthy of my status. Someone who can support me at the level I deserve. He expected tears, begging, hysterics. He was preparing for it. I could see it in the way he stood, leaning back slightly, hands in his pockets, ready to fend off my emotional attacks. Wayne always enjoyed the moments when I lost control. It gave him additional evidence of my emotional instability. But this time, I felt a strange calmness, 10 million reasons to be calm. Okay, I said quietly. What? He blinked, clearly not expecting such a reaction. I agree, I repeated more clearly. Divorce is a good idea. You agree? Wayne looked at me as if I had suddenly spoken a foreign language. Yes, I slowly put the phone back in my pocket. You're right. We both deserve better. But, he trailed off, obviously confused. I thought you. I finished his sentence, and for the first time in months, my voice sounded really strong. Will I beg you to stay? Don't be silly, he said. It's just that you've always been dependent on you? I finished his thought again. Yes, I have. But people change, Wayne. He looked at me with such surprise that for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. almost. But then I remembered all the years of humiliation, all the comments he'd made about my incompetence, all the times he'd made me feel worthless. "And how are you going to survive?" He resumed his usual arrogant smile. "With no job, no prospects, no—" "I'll manage," I interrupted him. "Don't worry about me. I'm not worried." He laughed, but his laugh was uncertain. "I'm just stating the facts. You've never been on your own, Libby. You've always needed someone to take care of you." "Maybe," I shrugged, feeling my confidence grow with each passing second. "But that's not your problem anymore, is it?" I picked up the folder from the table and headed for the kitchen. I needed to be alone, to process everything that had happened, to call Mercy. Wayne remained standing at the kitchen island, his confident smile gradually fading, replaced by an expression of confusion. "Are you serious?" he asked me at my back. "Just agreeing? Without any objections?" I stopped in the doorway and turned to him. "Absolutely serious," I replied calmly. "I think it's time for us both to move on. You want someone more worthwhile." And I trailed off, feeling my phone vibrate again in my pocket. $10 million. For my mind, for my work, for my worthless science. He almost spat the words out, and I saw his face flush with anger. "And I said, feeling my lips stretch into a slight smile. "I want someone who sees my true worth." Without waiting for an answer, I walked out of the kitchen, closing the door behind me. And for the first time in 8 years of marriage, I didn't feel afraid of the future, only relief and an amazing sense of freedom. The phone call did not stop ringing as I quickly climbed the stairs to our bedroom. I knew it was Mercy, and I knew I had to answer it, but right now I needed a moment alone with myself. After closing the door, I fell on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to exhale. $10 million. My freedom. A price I never thought I would receive for my invention. Or for my freedom. Wayne wouldn't come up here for at least an hour. He never followed me during our fights. Instead, he waited for me to calm down and come downstairs, quiet and contrite, ready to accept his terms. But that would not happen today. The phone vibrated again. "Merci." This time I answered it. "Libby. Oh my God, at last. Did you see their letter? 10 million. Her voice was almost breaking with excitement. "I saw it," I replied quietly, involuntarily looking back at the door. "And? You're talking like it's $10, not 10 million. Do you realize what that means?" I closed my eyes, and pictures of the past flashed before my inner vision. Our house, perfectly furnished to Wayne's taste. His daily comments about my appearance, work, intelligence, my gradual loss of my own self. "That means I can leave," I said so quietly that Mercy barely heard. "Leave?" She was silent for a moment. "You mean from Wayne? He just proposed a divorce." "What?" Her voice soared an octave higher. "And what did you say?" "I said I accept." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then Mercy took a deep breath. "Libby Harlow, you are full of surprises. Can we get together? Now?" "Not today." I glanced at the door again. "I have to think about something." "Tomorrow at the lab?" "Okay," she agreed reluctantly. "But if you need anything at all." "I know. Thanks, Mercy." I turned off the phone and fell back, staring at the ceiling. Our bed, like everything else in this house, was Wayne's choice. The mattress was too hard for me, but it never mattered, like so many other things in our life together. When did I start losing myself? When did I let Wayne convince me that I was worthless? Perhaps it started in my childhood, in a family where women were always inferior to men. My mother, Eleanor Harlow, was the epitome of the ideal wife by 50s standards, always smiling, always well-groomed, never contradicting her father. Henry Harlow, a civil engineer, was the head of the family in the most traditional sense of the word. His word was law. His comfort was a priority. His wishes were orders. Men, Libby, my mother used to tell me while braiding my unruly red hair, don't like smart women. They need quiet, modest companions who will not outshine them with their achievements. I nodded, but even then I knew I wanted something else. From a young age, I was attracted to books on chemistry and physics, and I could spend hours looking at formulas, trying to understand how the world works on a molecular level. My grandmother, Emilia, was the only one who supported my scientific interests. Don't listen to them, girl, she would whisper, slipping another science book under my blanket. Your mind is your greatest strength. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. My grandmother died when I was 14, leaving me a small amount of money that I could only receive when I came of age. This money later paid for my education at the university, where I studied chemistry, and it was there, in my second year, that I met Wayne Prescott. He was 3 years older than me, a business school star with a brilliant future and a stunning smile. I still remember that day, the university library, the smell of old books and coffee, my thick-rimmed glasses, my hair in a messy bun, and organic chemistry formulas scattered all over the table. These formulas are as confusing as your hair, he said, suddenly appearing next to me, and there was no mockery in his voice, just a playfulness that made me look up. Wayne Prescott was the embodiment of everything I wasn't: confident, charismatic, with impeccable style and a natural ability to charm others. Next to him, I felt both invisible and the only person in the whole world. He invited me for coffee, and I agreed, not realizing at the time that it would be the beginning of the end of my true self. Our dates were a fairy tale. Wayne was attentive, witty, and a good listener. He was interested in my research, asked questions that made me think. This appealed to me. After all, few guys were interested in anything more than my looks. You're special, Libby, he would say, looking me in the eye. You have depth in you. I believed him, and that was my first mistake. I didn't see that behind the compliments was something else, a desire to control me, to shape me to his needs, to change me into the special girl he wanted me to be. The changes began gradually, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was just little things, comments about my clothes. This dress is too bright for an elegant girl like you. My hairstyle? Your hair would look better if you straightened it. My friends, that Carla is too loud. She's not on your level. I didn't notice how I was gradually drifting away from my friends, how I was changing my style, my behavior, my interests to meet his expectations. Wayne was so convincing, so confident, that I began to doubt my own judgment. My master's thesis was the turning point. I was working on an innovative method for synthesizing catalysts that could revolutionize the pharmaceutical industry. My advisor was thrilled. My colleagues were jealous, and I was over the moon. Imagine, Wayne, I said the night we celebrated him getting a job at a prestigious consulting firm. If this works out, my research could change the way we make drugs. This would mean cheaper, more accessible medicines for millions of people. I expected to see pride and admiration in his eyes, but instead I saw condescension, the same condescension with which adults look at children's dreams. Libby, honey, he stroked my hand as if to calm an excited child. Let's be realistic. Do you really think you can do what thousands of experienced scientists with million-dollar budgets have failed to do? But my preliminary results in the laboratory and real production are different things, he interrupted. It's ruled by money and connections, not ideas. But ideas can bring money, I insisted. Of course, my dear, he smiled that smile I later came to hate. But it takes special people. People with charisma, connections, influence. He didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. Not people like me. Was obvious. Not people like you. Something changed between us that night. Or maybe nothing had changed. I just saw something for the first time that I hadn't wanted to notice before. But I was too much in love, too dependent on his approval to back down. We got married a year after I graduated. The ceremony was everything Wayne wanted: elegant, low key, with all the right people on the guest list. I was wearing the dress he chose, with the hairstyle he approved, smiling the way he liked. "You are so beautiful," he whispered in my ear during our first dance. "My perfect wife." At the time, these words seemed like a compliment. Now I realize that it was a declaration of possession. The first years of marriage passed in a whirlwind of moves, new jobs, and social events. Wayne was rapidly climbing the career ladder, and with each of his promotions, the demands on me as a wife of a successful man grew. I got a job in a small research laboratory, but my work was always secondary to his career. "Why do you need this job?" he would ask when I would stay late in the lab. "I make enough for both of us." "It's not about the money, Wayne," I tried to explain. "It gives me a sense of meaning." "Meaning?" He laughed, and for the first time, his laugh was openly dismissive. "What's the point of mixing chemicals in test tubes? The real point is in the real results, Libby." "Science changes the world," I protested quietly. "Not your science," he said, and the words hit me like a slap in the face. With each passing year, his comments became more and more blatant, more and more cruel. My appearance: "You need to lose weight, Libby." The wife of a man of my stature can't look normal. My work: "Why haven't you been promoted yet?" "Oh, right, because you just mix liquids according to the prescription." My friends: "That Mercy of yours is so vulgar. Can't you find someone more sophisticated?" Mercy Donovan, the only person who remained in my life despite all Wayne's attempts to isolate me. We met 3 years ago when I moved to a new lab. She was a new analyst, bright, direct, with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. We hit it off right away. "Your husband is an asshole," she said after our first company party, where Wayne pointed out my incompetence in understanding financial markets in front of everyone. "He's just straightforward." I tried to defend him, but even to me it didn't sound convincing. "He's humiliating you, Libby." Mercy looked me straight in the eye. I didn't know what to say, because deep down I knew she was right. But how could I explain that over the years of living with Wayne, I had become so accustomed to my inferiority that another scenario seemed impossible? That evening, when I got home, I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Who is this woman with dull eyes and an uncertain smile? What happened to the Libby who dreamed of changing the world with her research? The next day, I rented a small space on the outskirts of the city, a former warehouse converted into offices. I told Wayne that I had signed up for yoga. He just shrugged his shoulders. Yoga seemed like a harmless female hobby that might help me finally get in shape. And I began to create my secret laboratory. At first, it was just a place where I could experiment without constant pressure, without having to prove my worth. I bought equipment little by little, using part of my salary, which Wayne dismissively called pocket money. And there, in that small, ill-equipped lab, I returned to my master's thesis, an innovative catalyst that could change the process of drug synthesis. I worked in the evenings, on weekends, when Wayne was away on business trips. It was my secret, my escape, my true self. The breakthrough happened 6 months ago. I had finally found the right formula, the catalyst I had been dreaming of for years. My hands were shaking as I looked at the test results. It was working. "I have to show you something," I told Mercy the next day as I led her into my secret laboratory. Her eyes widened when she saw the equipment. "Libby, what is this? What the hell is going on here?" I explained to her my project, my research, my breakthrough. She listened without interrupting and then hugged me tightly. You're a genius, she said simply, and you know what's best? It's all yours, not the lab, not the company. It's yours. What am I supposed to do with it? I asked, suddenly confused. Over the years of living with Wayne, I had become so accustomed to doubting my abilities that even my own success seemed like an illusion. Patent it, Mercy said without hesitation, and then sell it to the highest bidder. That formula is worth millions, Libby. Millions? I laughed, thinking she was joking. Don't exaggerate. I'm not exaggerating. She was completely serious. And you know what? I know a patent lawyer. I trust him. He can help you arrange everything so that no one, she paused, including your husband, can claim your work. I hesitated. Hiding the lab was one thing, but hiding a potentially valuable patent? It seemed wrong. Wayne has a right to know, I said, unsure. Has a right? Mercy raised a skeptical eyebrow. After all the things he said about your work? After all the times he belittled you and your abilities? Libby, that man has been systematically destroying your self-esteem for years. He doesn't deserve any part of your success. I didn't answer. Deep down, I knew she was right, but years of living with Wayne had taught me to question my own judgment, to see myself through his eyes, weak, incompetent, dependent. Think about it, Mercy said, squeezing my hand. Just think about it. This is your work, your mind, your invention. You deserve to be recognized, and freedom from a man who never believed in you. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Wayne was sleeping next to me, and I looked at his face, relaxed in his sleep, without the usual mask of superiority. I used to love that face. I used to believe that behind that mask was a person who saw me, the real me. But the years have shown me otherwise. For Wayne, I was always just an appendage to his life, a trophy that eventually lost its luster and became a disappointment. The next day, I met with a lawyer recommended by Mercy. The patenting process began, secretly from Wayne. It was my little rebellion, my attempt to take back control of my own life. And then the offers from pharmaceutical companies started coming in. At first, they were small, 100,000, 500,000. But when the news of my catalyst spread in the industry, the stakes went up. 2 million, 5, 8, and finally, 10 million from Novartis, the giant of the pharmaceutical industry. I couldn't believe it. $10 million for my formula, for my crappy science, for work that Wayne thought was a waste of time. Are you going to sign? Mercy asked when I showed her the final offer. I don't know, I said honestly. It's, it's too much. I don't deserve that kind of money. Yes, you do, she said firmly. It's your work, your genius. But it's not about the money, Libby. It's about what you'll do afterward. Afterward? When you're financially independent. When you're finally free of Wayne. I didn't answer, but I realized something in that moment. Money is not just numbers in an account. It's freedom. Freedom from Wayne, from his control, from his humiliation. Freedom to be myself, to do what I love without fear of judgment or ridicule. 2 days ago, I signed a contract with Novartis, and today I lost my job because of the company's downsizing. And Wayne, instead of supporting me, did what he always does, humiliated me, ridiculed me, confirmed everything I've always known about him but was afraid to admit. Now, lying on our bed, I realized that I would never tell him about the money. Not because I want revenge, but because I want to finally start living without his shadow over me, without his voice in my head constantly reminding me how worthless I am. I pulled out my phone and texted Mercy. You were right. I signed the contract. And Wayne just proposed a divorce. Her response came almost instantly. Fate has a strange sense of humor sometimes. Are you okay? Yes, I wrote back and was surprised to realize it was true. For the first time in years, I'm really okay. And it was true. The invisible chains that had held me down for so long had finally begun to loosen, and I was ready to step into an unknown future without Wayne, but with the faith in myself that I had lost so long ago. The office of the Carmichael and Partners law firm was located on the 23rd floor of a skyscraper in the city's business center. Glass doors, marble floors, dim lighting, everything screamed money and influence. I nervously tugged at the sleeve of my blouse, feeling like a stranger here. This was Wayne's world, not mine. Niels Adler was not what I expected. Instead of the typical polished lawyer, I saw a man in his 40s with tousled dark hair and thin-rimmed glasses that kept slipping down to the tip of his nose. "Come in, Ms. Prescott," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "Have a seat. I'm almost done." After a few minutes of silence, he finally closed the laptop and looked at me. "So, the divorce. I've reviewed the details of your case. Your husband hired Diana Forsyth." I nodded. Wayne wasted no time. Diane Forsyth was the most famous divorce lawyer in town, notorious for her aggressive tactics. "She's good," Adler continued, taking off his glasses. "Judging by the previous offers, your husband is determined to leave you, with the minimum." "I know," I said quietly. "Mrs. Prescott, please call me Libby." "Okay, Libby. I need to know what we're dealing with. What do you have? Assets, real estate, savings?" I hesitated. "I don't have anything," I finally said. "At least nothing that matters in the divorce proceedings." Adler sighed with visible disappointment. "Look, Libby, I can't help you if you're not going to be honest with me. Your husband is a successful financial advisor with a six-figure income. You share a house, investments, and accounts, and you say that you have nothing?" "Everything you listed is his," I replied. "He bought the house before we got married. The investments were made by him, in his name. The accounts, yes, they are joint, but I have never managed this money." "And your job? You worked at Pharmagen, didn't you?" "I did. I was fired a week ago." "Downsizing." Adler rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Well, it's not the best situation. But given the length of the marriage and the difference in income, you're entitled to alimony." "I don't want alimony," I interrupted him. "No alimony, no share in the house, no investments, nothing. Ms. Harlow," he returned to his formal address. "As your lawyer, I strongly advise against this approach. You have legal rights to—" "I know my rights." I looked him straight in the eye. "And I know what I want. I want a quick, clean divorce. No alimony, no division of property, no litigation." Adler looked at me for a long time, then sighed. "May I ask why?" "Because I want to be free," I said quietly, "without any ties, without dependence, without his presence in my life." Adler nodded slowly. "I see. If that is your decision, I will respect it. But as your lawyer, I need to make sure you realize the consequences. Without financial support, without a job, how do you plan to—" "I'll manage," I answered with a confidence I hadn't felt a week ago. "Good. I will prepare the documents according to your wishes. But, Libby," he switched to an informal address, "Diana Forsyth won't believe in your sudden generosity. She'll be looking for a trap." "Let her." I allowed myself a slight smile. Sometimes the best defense is no defense. Adler raised his eyebrows in surprise and then laughed. "You know, I'm beginning to think you're not as hopeless a case as I thought at first." The first meeting with the lawyers took place 3 days later. Wayne was sitting across from me, with the expression of restrained satisfaction of a predator who has cornered his prey. Next to him was Diana Forsyth, a woman with cold eyes. "Before we begin," she said in her polished voice, "my client is committed to a quick resolution, subject to reasonable demands from Miss Prescott." My client is also interested in a quick resolution, Niels said. In fact, she's prepared to accept your client's terms without modification. Silence fell. Diane Forsythe froze, pen in hand, and Wayne blinked, puzzled. You're saying your client accepts all the terms, including the waiver of alimony and community property? That's right, Adler nodded. Ms. Harlow is not claiming any assets or financial support. Wayne looked at me intently, and I saw suspicion flicker in his eyes. What's the catch, Libby? He asked bluntly, ignoring Forsythe's attempts to stop him. I looked him straight in the eye. There's no catch, Wayne. You want a divorce, you'll get one. You want to keep everything for yourself. Be my guest. But you have nothing, he said with such confidence that I almost felt sorry for him. I have myself, I replied calmly, and that's enough. Forsythe and Adler exchanged glances. Well, Forsythe was the first to recover. If your client agrees to our terms, we can proceed with the paperwork. But I want it on record that Miss Harlow is releasing her claims voluntarily. Of course, Adler nodded. My client will sign a statement to that effect. The rest of the meeting was tense. Wayne gave me several puzzled looks, trying to figure out what I was up to. His self-confidence gradually gave way to suspicion. When the meeting was over, Wayne intercepted me near the elevator. What are you up to? He asked quietly. This isn't like you, Libby. How do you know what I'm really like? I replied. You never tried to understand. I was your husband for 8 years. And in those 8 years, you never once asked me what I wanted. I looked at him. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, leaving him standing there with his mouth open. As the doors were closing, I saw his surprised expression. For the first time in all the years of our marriage, Wayne Prescott couldn't read me. The following weeks turned into a bureaucratic marathon, meetings with lawyers, signing documents, visits to the notary. Wayne insisted on speeding up the process, as if he was afraid I would change my mind. I didn't mind. I also wanted to start a new life as soon as possible. Nils Adler became more than just a lawyer for me. You've changed, he said after our next meeting, dramatically in these few weeks. Have I? I smiled. Maybe I've just stopped pretending to be someone else. Maybe, he nodded, taking off his glasses. You know, when you first came to me, I thought you were hopeless, I suggested. More like broken, he looked at me directly. I've seen a lot of divorces, but I've rarely met someone who was so transformed during the process. Thank you, I said simply, for everything. I was just doing my job. He shrugged, but I could see in his eyes that he understood. The final signing of the documents took place on Thursday at 10 in the morning in the courtroom. The judge quickly reviewed the papers and declared our marriage dissolved. Wayne sat next to me, but there was more than just an empty chair between us. When the judge announced his decision, Wayne turned to me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of relief, irritation, and something that almost looked like regret. Well, he said as we walked out into the hallway, that's it. That's it, I agreed. You can still stay in the house until you find something suitable, he said, sounding like he was doing me a favor. I won't put you out on the street. Thanks, but I've already found an apartment, I replied calmly. I'll move in this weekend. An apartment? He blinked, surprised. But with what money? I have savings, Wayne. I allowed myself a small smile. I'm not as helpless as you think. Savings? He almost laughed. You've never been good with money. People change, I shrugged, and they learn. Good luck, Libby. You too, Wayne. I shook his hand, feeling strangely distant. It was the hand of the man I had once loved. And now he was almost a stranger. Nils Adler was waiting for me at the exit of the courthouse. Congratulations on your divorce, he said with a slight irony. Not the most usual greeting, but in your case, I think it's appropriate. Thank you, I smiled, feeling the sunlight on my face, for your representation and understanding. That's my job, he shrugged, but I could see the warmth in his eyes. Wayne got what he wanted, I said without bitterness, and I got my freedom. And now what? Niels asked, his voice sounding genuinely curious. I thought about the money that had already been deposited into my account, $10 million, an amount that seemed unrealistic a week ago. I thought about the small apartment I was renting in the Riverside neighborhood. I'm going to start a new life, I said simply. Niels nodded as if he understood more than I had said. If you ever need legal advice, he handed me his business card. Call me. I took the business card, feeling that it was more than a professional courtesy. But was I ready for something more? Not yet. I needed time to myself right now. Thank you, I said, putting the card back in my bag. Maybe I'll take you up on your offer. The first thing I did when I got home was call Mercy. So, she asked instead of greeting me, it's official? It is official, I confirmed, kicking off my shoes. I'm not Mrs. Prescott anymore. Congratulations. She sounded so happy that I laughed involuntarily. Does he still think he left you penniless? Yeah, I smiled. And can you believe he offered to stay in the house until I find a place to live? Such generosity. That's very nice of him, Mercy snorted. And what did you say? That I've already found an apartment and I'm moving this weekend. Great. Speaking of which, did the money come in? I took a deep breath, still not fully believing the reality of the situation. Yes, I said quietly. Yesterday, all 10 million, minus taxes, of course. Jesus, Libby. Mercy was silent for a moment. Do you realize what this means? I know, I rolled my eyes. And to be honest, it's a little scary. Scary? Are you kidding? It's the best thing that could ever happen. Not the money, Mercy. It's freedom, the ability to choose. After all these years of having Wayne make every decision for me, it's a little scary to suddenly be on my own. I know, she said at last. But you'll get through it, Libby. You're stronger than you think. I hope so, I smiled. You know, I've already made some plans. Plans? What kind of plans? I don't want to tell you yet, so as not to jinx it. But you'll find out soon, I promise. I spent the next 3 days packing. It turned out that in 8 years of marriage, I had accumulated surprisingly few personal items. Clothes, a few books that Wayne deemed acceptable, photos, and that was it. My life fit into a few boxes. On Sunday morning, I took one last look back at the house I once considered my home. Wayne had left for the weekend with friends, probably to celebrate his new bachelorhood, and we hadn't even said goodbye. Maybe it was for the best. A taxi pulled up, and the driver helped me load the boxes. I sat in the back seat and gave him the address. My new address. The apartment was small, in an old brick building, with high ceilings and large windows. Nothing special by Wayne's standards, but for me it was the beginning of a new life. When the taxi drove off, I didn't look back. There was no need to. The future was ahead of me, and for the first time in years, I felt not fear, but excitement at all the possibilities it could bring. The morning sun flooded the spacious kitchen with soft golden light. I sat at the bar with a cup of coffee, watching the rays stream through the tall windows, creating patterns on the marble surface. 6 months. Only 6 months have passed since the day I signed the last of the divorce papers. It seemed like it was in another life. My phone vibrated, a message from Mercy. Don't forget the meeting with the investors at 2. And wear that navy blue dress. You look like a real barefoot woman in it. I smiled. Mercy, my loyal friend and now business partner, always knew how to cheer me up, although this was rarely necessary anymore. My life had changed so dramatically that sometimes I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Not outwardly. I was still the same red-haired Libby with freckles on her nose, but there was a sparkle in my eyes that hadn't been there for years, a sparkle of confidence, of freedom, of life. I opened my laptop to review the financial reports before the meeting. My new company, Catalyst, named after Amelia's grandmother, was showing steady growth. Who would have thought that 6 months after my most painful divorce, I would be running my own research lab and a foundation to support women in science? The first weeks after the divorce were strange, a mixture of euphoria and panic. The sudden freedom was intoxicating, but also frightening. Will I be able to cope on my own? Was Wayne right when he called me incapable and worthless? These doubts haunted me like ghosts, especially at night when I lay awake in my new apartment. But then a decision came. It happened suddenly when I came across an article about a young researcher who couldn't get funding for her innovative project. Her story reminded me of my own a talented woman whose ideas were not taken seriously because of her gender and young age. I contacted her the same day. Sophia Cranch, 29 years old, a biochemist with an amazing mind and ideas that could change the way we treat chronic diseases. At our first meeting in a coffee shop, she spoke about her research with such passion that I instantly recognized myself in her. The old me who believed in the power of science and her own abilities before Wayne systematically destroyed that belief. I only need $300,000 for the initial phase, she explained, showing me her calculations. But no investor takes me seriously. They see a young woman and immediately start explaining my own work to me. I believe in your project, I said, feeling something click inside me, as if the last piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. She looked at me with disbelief, then with hope, and finally with such sincere gratitude that I almost burst into tears right there, amid the noise of the coffee shop and the smell of fresh bread. That was my first investment. It was followed by 4 more projects by young women scientists who could not break through the barriers of traditional funding. Each of them had ideas that deserved attention and support, and in each of them, I saw a reflection of myself, the self that could have existed if I had believed in my own strength earlier. But the real turning point was the opening of Catalyst. I bought an old building of a former textile factory and turned it into a modern research laboratory equipped with the latest technology. It was my temple of science, a place where ideas could develop freely, unconstrained by the conservatism of traditional institutions. Mercy joined me as my chief operating officer. She left her stable job at Pharmagen without hesitation. "Are you kidding?" she said when I questioned her decision. "To work side by side with the genius who invented a $10 million catalyst? I should have paid you for that opportunity." We quickly assembled a team of talented scientists, many of them women, who, like me, had not been properly recognized in traditional companies. Catalyst quickly gained a reputation as an innovative center with a unique approach to research. And then there was home, my real home, not just a place of residence. When I first saw it, an old red brick mansion with huge windows and a terrace overlooking the river, I realized that this was exactly what I had always wanted. Not sterile luxury like Wayne's house, but a real warm living space where I could be myself. I spent the first weeks in my new home, furnishing it the way I wanted it. Bright colors, comfortable furniture, books everywhere, a room turned into a home laboratory. No designers, no status conformity, just my preferences, my desires, my choice. It was therapy to create a space that reflected the real me, not the role I had played for years. I was so focused on my new life that I hardly thought about Wayne. Sometimes his image would appear in my dreams, critical, arrogant, humiliating. But every day these dreams became less frequent and his image less threatening. He was turning into what he really was, just a man who once had power over me, but no longer did. So, when Mercy called one evening with news about him, I was surprised not so much by the information itself as by my reaction to it. "Did you hear?" she asked without introducing herself. "Wayne's company is bankrupt, a complete wreck. They got burned on a real estate investment before the crisis, a classic case of bad timing and even worse risk analysis. I felt a strange emptiness where there should have been gloating satisfaction. Neither joy nor sadness, just the realization that life goes on. They say he's lost almost everything," Mercy continued. "His house is in jeopardy, his reputation destroyed. I hope he pulls through," I said sincerely. "Really?" Mercy sounded genuinely surprised. "After everything he's done to you?" "I don't wish him harm, Mercy," I said after a pause. "Energy I'd rather put into something constructive." "Who are you and what have you done with my friend?" she asked, half jokingly. The Libby I knew would have at least gloated a little. But Libby was too dependent on Wayne's opinion, even in her hatred of him, I said, suddenly realizing the truth of my words. I never thought that Wayne and I would cross paths again, but life has a strange way of destroying our expectations. It happened at a charity event in support of women in science organized by our foundation. I stood on a small stage talking about M Catalyst's mission and introducing the young researchers we supported. The hall was full of representatives of the scientific community, businessmen, and journalists. And among them, in the back row, I saw a familiar face. Wayne Prescott looked different. The expensive suit remained, but something in his posture changed. His shoulders were slightly lowered, his gaze less confident. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and something resembling admiration. "Libby," he said, sounding unusually tentative, "you look wonderful." "Thank you, Wayne," I replied calmly. "I didn't expect to see you here. I was invited by Jeremy Collins." He nodded toward the older man I'd spoken to the other day. "He's trying to help me make some new contacts after, well, you probably heard." "I did," I nodded. "I'm sorry about what happened." He smiled bitterly. "Sorry? After everything I told you? After the way I treated you?" "I'm not that kind of person, Wayne," I said simply. "Never have been, though you never seemed to notice." He looked like I had just slapped him. Then he composed himself and looked around, at the elegant room, at the guests in expensive clothes, at the banners with the M Catalyst logo. "This is all yours?" he asked, his voice sounding genuinely surprised. "The lab, the foundation, all of it?" "Yes," I said simply. "But how?" He lowered his voice. "How did you get the money for all of this? You left with nothing." I met his gaze calmly. "Do you remember my stupid project? Those stupid chemicals I was working on? I patented the formula and sold it for $10 million. His face changed, as if in slow motion, from surprise to shock, from shock to understanding, and finally to something that looked almost like admiration. "10 million?" he almost whispered. "And you? You already had that money when we were getting a divorce?" "The contract was signed the day before you proposed the divorce," I answered. "And you didn't say anything? It wasn't a question, but rather a statement of fact, full of distrust." "What would have changed, Wayne?" I asked quietly. "Would you have suddenly begun to respect me? Would you admit that you were wrong all these years when you said I was worthless? Or would you just try to get a cut of the money?" He opened his mouth to argue, but he couldn't. I I don't know what to say," he finally said. "You don't have to say anything." I touched his arm gently. "I want nothing but the best for you, Wayne. I really do." He looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You've changed, Libby," he said finally. "You're stronger." "I've always been strong," I replied. "And you? You made sure I didn't know." With those words, I left him standing in the midst of the noisy crowd, alone and confused. The next day, he called me. I did not answer. Then came a letter, a long one, full of apologies and confessions. I read it once and deleted it. The past was in the past. And then, 2 weeks later, an official letter came from the law firm that represented Wayne. They claimed that I had concealed significant assets during the divorce and demanded a revision of the terms of the property division. It was so predictable that I wasn't even surprised. Wayne has always been Wayne. First, an attempt to manipulate through emotions, then through guilt, and finally through the law. I called Niels Adler the same day. Niels, it's Libby Harlow. I have a legal situation. Libby, his voice sounded genuinely happy. What is it? I explained the situation with the letter from Wayne's lawyers. Niels listened intently, sometimes asking clarifying questions. Well, he said when I finished, technically, they have no grounds for a lawsuit. The patent was filed in your maiden name. The sale took place after the divorce proceedings began, and the money was deposited into an account opened after the divorce was filed. But, he paused, that won't stop them from trying. The legal process can be long and exhausting, even if the law is on your side. What do you recommend? I asked, in person. Me, you, Wayne, and his lawyer. Sometimes a straight talk can prevent months of litigation. We met at Niels's office 3 days later. Wayne came with a new lawyer, a young, aggressive man named Andrew Keller, who immediately began the conversation by threatening a lengthy trial and a public scandal. My client is not afraid of the courts or publicity, Niels calmly replied. But before we start fighting, let's try to talk like reasonable people. The next hour was spent in legal discussions. Niels methodically broke down each of Keller's arguments, demonstrating that their lawsuit had no chance. I watched this exchange of arguments with a strange detachment, as if it was not happening to me. Wayne was sitting across from me, occasionally glancing at me, at first angry, then confused, and finally almost pleading. I think the situation is clear, Niels summarized when Keller had exhausted his arguments. You can try, of course, but it will be a waste of your client's time and money. Keller started to say something, but Wayne suddenly raised his hand, stopping him. That's enough, he said tiredly. Libby, can I talk to you in private? I nodded. 5 minutes, Neil said, standing up. Mr. Keller and I will be outside. When we were alone, Wayne looked at me for a long time, as if trying to memorize every feature. You know, he said finally, when I heard about your success, my first thought was, it's not fair. It was supposed to be my money. But then I remembered how you had been talking about your research for years, how your eyes would light up when you talked about your project, and how I used to make fun of you every time, calling your work a waste of time. I was a terrible husband, Libby, he continued in a quieter voice. I ruined you day after day, year after year. And the worst part is that I did it deliberately. I like the feeling of superiority. I like to see you get smaller and smaller, more insecure. It was a way to control you. I know, I answered calmly. I've always known. I just didn't have the strength to fight it. And now you do. He smiled bitterly. It's ironic, isn't it? You've become stronger and I've lost everything. You can start over, Wayne, I said. Anyone can. I don't know. He shook his head. I've always defined myself by success, by status, by money. Without that, who am I? You'll have to find out for yourself. I stood up, making it clear that the conversation was over. About the lawsuit, there won't be one, he interrupted. I withdraw all claims. You deserve every cent of your money, and a much better man than me. With that, he stood up and walked to the door. He's a good man, Wayne said, nodding toward the corridor where Niels was waiting. Don't lose him like I lost you. After he left, Niels came back into the office, surprised by Wayne's sudden surrender. What did you say to him? He asked when we were alone. Nothing much, I shrugged. I think he just finally realized he lost. Niels looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something else, something more personal. You know, Libby, he said, taking off his glasses and wiping them, as he always did in moments of candor. I've met a lot of strong women in my practice. It wasn't a transformation, I replied, suddenly realizing the truth of my words. It was a return to myself, to the Libby I've always been deep down inside, but was afraid to show. Well, he put his glasses back on and smiled. Then I'm glad I got to know the real Libby Harlow. It sounded like the beginning of something new, and I felt my heart speed up. You know, I haven't thanked you properly for all your help, I said, gathering my bag. Maybe dinner? Tonight? He looked at me in surprise, and then a sincere, warm smile lit up his face. I'd love to, he said simply. That evening, sitting across from Niels in a cozy restaurant, telling him about my plans to expand the lab, listening to his stories about growing up in a small town on the coast, I suddenly realized how far I had come. From the scared, insecure woman who came to his office 6 months ago to the person who was sitting here now, strong, confident, free. It was an amazing metamorphosis, not external, but internal, not a transformation into someone else, but a return to my true self. And looking into Nail's warm gray-green eyes, I realized that my journey was just beginning. The courtroom was packed to capacity despite the early hour. The case of Prescott versus Harlow aroused great interest. The story of a former financial advisor who accused his ex-wife of hiding assets during their divorce promised to be juicy. I sat next to Niels, trying to keep a calm expression on my face. For the past 3 months, this hearing had become the center of my life, consuming time and energy I would have preferred to spend on developing M-Catalyst. Wayne had withdrawn his informal complaint after our meeting in Niels's office, but then, apparently under the influence of his new lawyer, he decided to file a formal lawsuit. Wayne sat a few meters away from me, perfectly shaved and dressed as usual. But something in his posture had changed. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes uncertain. He was no longer the confident, arrogant man I had known for 8 years. The crisis in his company, the loss of status and money had done their job. Judge Eleanor Ramirez, a stern woman in her 50s with a piercing gaze, studied the documents in front of her. In 20 minutes, she was going to make a decision that could change my life. Are you okay? Niels asked quietly, sensing my tension. Yes, I answered, grateful for his presence. Over the past months, our relationship had grown from a professional one to something more personal. He became not only my lawyer, but also a close friend, and eventually something more. We took our time, both realizing the value of a slow, organic relationship. Everyone, stand up. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced, and the room stood in tense anticipation. Judge Ramirez began by reciting the facts of the case, methodically outlining the arguments of both sides. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but at certain points I could see her eyes resting on Wayne with subtle disapproval. Having considered all the evidence presented, she finally came to the point, the court rules that Mr. Prescott's motion for modification of the terms of the divorce and redistribution of assets is dismissed. The patent in question was developed personally by the defendant and registered in her maiden name. The sale of the patent took place after the filing of the divorce petition, and the funds were transferred to a separate account opened after the divorce proceedings were initiated. According to state law, these assets are not subject to division between spouses. There were whispers in the room. I could feel the tension that had been weighing on my shoulders for the past months begin to ease. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice hardening, the court notes that the plaintiff voluntarily waived any financial claims during the initial divorce proceedings and signed the relevant documents in the presence of his lawyer. The plaintiff also failed to provide any evidence that the defendant intentionally concealed information about the patent or its potential value. I risked a glance at Wayne. He sat motionless, staring at the table in front of him. His face was pale, not from anger, as I had expected, but from something more akin to shame. Thus, the lawsuit is dismissed in its entirety. Court costs are to be borne by the plaintiff. The hearing is closed. The gavel has put an end to this story, at least legally. As Niels and I were leaving the courtroom, I noticed that Wayne was left sitting there, alone and confused, while his lawyer was already gathering up the documents, obviously unhappy with the outcome. Wait a minute, I said to Niels, and before he could say anything, I headed for my ex-husband. Wayne looked up when I stopped next to him. Congratulations on your victory, he said quietly. You deserve it. It's not about winning or losing, Wayne, I replied, sitting down next to him. And justice, he smiled bitterly. Justice? Yeah, I guess. I got what I deserved, didn't I? For years, I humiliated your intelligence, your work, and now you're successful, and I'm bankrupt. I'm sorry you lost the company, I said sincerely. Why? He looked me straight in the eye. Why do you care? After everything I've done to you. I thought about it. Why really? Because hatred is too heavy a burden, Wayne, I finally answered. It doesn't poison the person it's directed at. It poisons the person who carries it. I've spent too many years in the shadow of your personality. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in the shadow of my hatred for you. He stared at me for a long time, as if he were seeing me for the first time. You were always better than me, he said finally. I was just afraid to admit it. It's not about who's better, I shook my head. It's just that at some point I realized my worth. Not the one you or anyone else had assigned me, but my true value, and that changed everything. We sat in silence, two former partners whose paths had diverged so abruptly and irrevocably. The courtroom gradually emptied, leaving us in a strange bubble of calm amidst the chaos of the past. What are you going to do now? I asked, breaking the silence. I don't know. Try to start over, I guess. I have an idea for a new business, a consulting firm that specializes in risk management for small businesses. It's ironic given my own failure, but I've learned a lot. Unfortunately, no investor would risk investing in someone with my reputation. I listened to him, and an idea formed in my head. What if there was an investor? I asked cautiously. What kind of investor would invest in a man who had just lost a lawsuit against his ex-wife, whom he tried to steal? He laughed bitterly. Wayne froze, looking at me in absolute shock. You… what? I could invest in your project, I repeated calmly. Under certain conditions, of course. Are you kidding? He looked around nervously, as if looking for hidden cameras. Or revenge? Neither. I shook my head. I'm constantly investing in promising projects. And you, for all your flaws, are a great analyst and have valuable experience, especially now that you've been through a crash. Sometimes the best risk advisors are those who have been burned themselves. Wayne looked at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. What are the conditions? He finally asked. First, anger management therapy. I looked him straight in the eye. Regular sessions with reports. Second, a mentoring program for young women in business. You have valuable knowledge and connections that can help those who are struggling to make it in this world. And thirdly, full financial transparency of the business. That's it? He looked surprised. No humiliating conditions? No restrictions on my role or salary? This isn't about humiliation, Wayne. I smiled softly. It's about growth, yours and those you can help. I don't want to control you or limit you. I just want you to use your potential for something constructive. He was silent for a long time, obviously trying to comprehend my proposal. Why? He finally asked. Why are you doing this? After everything? Because I believe in second chances, I answered honestly, and because it's not just about you or me. It's about creating something that can help others. Everyone has an invisible value, Wayne, even you. Our conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Niels, who coughed tactfully, signaling that it was time to leave. Think about it, I said, standing up. As I left the courtroom, hand in hand with Niels, I felt a strange relief, as if the last weight of the past had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Are you sure about this? Niels asked as we stepped out into the sunlight. Investing in the business of a man who just tried to sue you? I smiled, but yes, I'm sure. It's not about forgiveness, Niels. It's about recognizing that the past shapes us, but it doesn't define us, and that sometimes the best way to leave the past behind is to turn it into something constructive. He looked at me with that special expression that came to his face when he discovered new facets of my personality. You are a unique woman, Libby Harlow, he said simply. I just know my worth, I replied, squeezing his hand, and the value of the chances that life sometimes gives us. 3 weeks later, Wayne called. He accepted my offer with all the strings attached. We met in a neutral place, a coffee shop in the city center, to discuss the details. The conversation was businesslike, with no emotional outbursts or reference to the past. Wayne seemed different, calmer, less arrogant. The first therapy sessions, which he had already started attending as a gesture of goodwill, were obviously paying off. Thank you, he said at the end of the meeting, not just for the investment. Don't disappoint me, I replied seriously, and don't disappoint yourself. My relationship with Niels developed slowly but surely. Unlike the rapid whirlwind of my first marriage, this time I was in no hurry. We both valued our independence and understood that true intimacy is built on mutual respect, not dependence. Don't you ever think about remarrying? He asked me one evening as we sat on the terrace of my house watching the sunset. I answered honestly, but not now. Now I am enjoying my freedom, my space. For the first time in my life, I'm really living for myself. I understand. He nodded, and there was no resentment or disappointment in his eyes. And I respect that. And you? I asked, turning to him. Are you thinking about marriage? With you? He smiled. Yes, I am. But I'm ready to wait until we're both ready for it, if that day ever comes. I'm glad to have met you, Niels Adler, I said, feeling something warm spread through my chest. I'm glad you see me for who I am. And I'm glad you let me see it, he replied simply. The new M Catalyst building opened exactly 1 year after my divorce from Wayne. The modern complex with laboratories, offices, and conference rooms was located on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by greenery and room for future expansion. A glass sign flaunted above the main entrance, the Emily Harlow Laboratory. Your grandmother would be proud, Mercy said, standing next to me in front of the ribbon I was about to cut in a few minutes. I hope so, I replied, feeling my heart ache to think of the small but strong woman who was the first to believe in me. She always said I could change the world with my mind. At the time, it seemed like just encouragement. Now I realize that she saw something that I didn't. The opening ceremony brought together more than 200 guests, scientists, investors, journalists, and students. Among them, I noticed Wayne standing modestly in the back row. He came uninvited, but I was glad to see him. His consulting firm had started a month ago, and the initial feedback was positive. The mentoring program for women in business he launched as part of our deal had already attracted the attention of several large corporations. When it was time for my speech, I went up on the small stage and looked around at the sea of faces in front of me. Among them were Niels, smiling encouragingly, Mercy, who could barely hold back tears of pride, the young researchers who had received grants from our foundation, and even a few former colleagues from PharmaGen who had once doubted my abilities. A year ago, I began, my life seemed to be in ruins. I lost my job, my marriage, my sense of security. But in fact, I found the most valuable thing, myself, my true value, which is not measured by money, status, or anyone's approval. I paused, letting my words echo in the silence. The Emily Harlow Laboratory is named after my grandmother, a woman who believed in me when I didn't. A woman who saw me not as a wife of a successful man or a mediocrity, but as a person with unique abilities and potential. This place was created not just for scientific research. It is a space where everyone can reveal their true value, free from restrictions and stereotypes. The audience applauded, and I noticed several women in the front rows wiping away tears. We live in a world that is constantly trying to determine our value through appearance, status, money, and connections. But the true value of a person is invisible. It is in their thoughts, their dreams, their ability to grow and change, in his ability to fall and rise, in their ability to see the value in others, even when they don't see it themselves. I looked at Wayne, who was listening with an expression that combined sadness and recognition, then at Niels, whose eyes were shining with pride and love. This lab is a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest obstacles become the greatest opportunities, that sometimes loss opens the way to true finding, and that the most important discoveries we make are not in test tubes or microscopes, but in ourselves. When I cut the ribbon and the doors of the new complex opened, I was overwhelmed with a feeling not of triumph, but of deep, calm satisfaction. Not of victory over the past, but of reconciliation with it. Not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new, more authentic life. Amidst the greetings and hugs, I was left alone for a moment with Niels, who took my hand and squeezed it lightly. "Are you happy?" he asked simply. I looked around at the building that embodied my dream, at the people who had come to share this moment, at the path that had brought me here, with all its pains and joys, its ups and downs. "Yes," I answered, and it was the pure, unadulterated truth. Not because everything is perfect, but because I finally know my true worth, and it is not in what I have, but in who I am. Niels smiled and kissed me, gently, with the respect I had been looking for and finally found. Not in money, not in status, not in someone's approval, but in the ability to see and appreciate ourselves and others as we really are, imperfect, complex, but infinitely valuable. And this, I realized, is the true balance of power, not in dominance or control, but in equality and mutual respect. Not in humiliating others to appear superior, but in lifting them up to grow together. My story did not end with a triumphant victory over Wayne. It did not end with a new marriage to Niels. It didn't end at all, because true stories never end. They just flow from one chapter to the next. But what began as a story of loss and betrayal turned into a story of finding myself, my strength, my value, and most importantly, my ability to see value in others, even in those who once did not see it in me. This, after all, is the true balance of power. Not who is stronger or richer, but who is able to use their power and wealth to make the world a little better, a little fairer, a little kinder. And standing in front of the door of my new laboratory, holding the hand of a man who saw and appreciated the real me, surrounded by people who believed in me and my work, I finally felt that I had found that balance. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And it was more than I could have ever dreamed of.